In January of this year, the average Canadian paid $1.27 per liter at the pump. By May, that same liter cost $1.93. In parts of Newfoundland, over $2. In Vancouver, $2.14 at one station. That's a 52% increase in 5 months. If you've been feeling that at the pump, you're not imagining it. But the story of why it happens is more complicated and more revealing than anything you've seen in the 2-minute news segments. Because this isn't just about a war in the Middle East, it's about how the entire global economy is built on a single 20-mile wide strip of water, and what happens when that strip closes. The Strait of Hormuz sits between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula. At its narrowest point, it's just 20 miles wide. The shipping lanes, the actual corridors where the tankers travel, are even smaller than that. Through those lanes passes approximately 20% of the world's crude oil every single day. Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Iraq, the oil that heats homes in Europe, powers factories in Asia, fills gas tanks in Canada, all of it moves through this one choke point. On February 28, 2026, US and Israeli forces launched strikes on Iran. Iran's response was immediate. Their navy broadcast a message over the maritime radio telling every ship in the strait that passage was forbidden. Then the Revolutionary Guard Corps began attacking vessels that tried to transit anyways. Traffic grounded to a halt. The most important oil choke point on the planet closed. Here's what happened to prices and why the numbers don't add up the way you expect. Global oil production contracted by approximately 8%. That's significant, but not catastrophic. 8% is not the end of the world, and yet oil prices spiked 60%. The gap between 8% supply drop at a 60% price spike tells you everything about how oil markets actually work. And it has almost nothing to do with supply and demand in the way that most people understand it. There's a concept in economics called elasticity of demand. For most products, if the price goes up, demand drops proportionally. Raise the price of breakfast cereal by 10% and consumers switch brands. Demand drops. Oil doesn't work that way. 3/4 of personal vehicle driving in North America is for non-discretionary trips. Commuting, groceries, school runs. You don't stop commuting because gas costs more. You pay it. And personal vehicles are only about 1/4 of global oil use. The rest is commercial. A trucking company doesn't stop trucking because fuel is expensive. They raise their prices, which raises the price of everything on their trucks, which then raises the price of everything in every store. This is why an 8% supply contraction causes a 60% price spike. Because when supply of something inelastic contracts, prices have to rise far more than the supply drop to reduce demand at all. The market was doing exactly what it was designed to do, and Canadians were paying for it. Now here's the part of the story that most coverage completely missed. The Strait of Hormuz closing was not a surprise to the countries most affected by it. They had been planning for this for decades. The UAE knew Iran could close their strait, so in 2008 they started building a pipeline to the other side. By the time the closure happened, a substantial portion of the UAE oil was already flowing around the strait entirely. Iran itself did the same thing. It built a pipeline to the port of Jask on the other side of the strait, specifically because it feared its enemies might one day try to blockade its own exports. Saudi Arabia, the Gulf's largest producer, built a pipeline to the Red Sea back in the 1980s during the Iran-Iraq War. That pipeline can carry up to 5 million barrels a day. Iraq even has a pipeline to Turkey, bypassing both the Strait and the Suez Canal. So why did prices still spike 60%? Because these pipelines, while real and significant, don't come close to replacing the full strait capacity. They're contingency plans, not replacements. The collective diversion routes could handle a fraction of the normal export volume, enough to soften the blow, not enough to prevent it. And then there was the insurance problem. Even when physical passage through the strait was possible, the bureaucratic reality made it functionally impossible. A very large crude carrier, the standard tanker for Gulf oil exports, is worth between 80 and $130 million. Its cargo at pre-war oil prices was worth another $130 million. No ship owner on earth takes that risk uninsured. When the war started, every major marine insurer simultaneously canceled their war risk policies for Gulf waters. 72-hour notice, policy terminated. It didn't matter whether Iran's missiles could physically hit the tankers. Without insurance, no captain was going to sail into those waters. When insurers eventually started writing new policies, the cost had increased more than 10 times. Policies that cost between 0.1 and 0.25% on a ship's value per journey, now costing 3%. That's not a minor adjustment. That's a fundamental restructuring of the economics of Gulf oil shipping. And that's the cost gets passed directly to everyone at the end of the supply chain, which means you, standing at the pump, watching the numbers climb. Back to Canada. In January 2026, the average price per liter was $1.27. By mid-May, $1.93 nationally. In Newfoundland, $2.14. In Vancouver, at one station, $2.14. The University of Toronto economics professor was asked, when does this end? His answer was sobering. Even if the war ended today, Canadians would continue seeing elevated gas prices for 3 to 6 months because the global supply chain doesn't recover overnight. Inventories that were depleted need to be rebuilt. Insurance premiums that exploded need to be normalized. Shipping routes that were disrupted need time to stabilize. And the gas price is only the most visible impact. Trucking companies have been paying more for fuel since March. Those costs move through the supply chain into the price of groceries, construction materials, heating. Everything that gets transported, which is everything, costs more when fuel costs more. The ripple effect from a 20-mile strait closing is felt in every Canadian household. Most of them have no idea why. So where does this go from here? There are three possible scenarios. Scenario 1, the war ends quickly and the strait reopens. Price begin to normalize over 3 to 6 months. This is the best case. It's also the scenario commodity traders bet against in the early days of the war and were wrong. Scenario 2, the conflict extends for months. JP Morgan warned that if the strait remained effectively closed into mid-April, US gas prices alone could hit $5 a gallon. Canada's equivalent would be prices approaching and potentially exceeding $2 per liter nationally. We've already seen that threshold cross in individual provinces. Scenario 3, the long-term structural shift. The illusion of Gulf stability has been shattered. For years, markets believed the Gulf region was geopolitically isolated from broader Middle East conflict. Iran just demonstrated overnight that it can shut down the global economy's most critical oil artery. Markets will price that risk in permanently. Even after this conflict ends, the uncertainty premium on Gulf oil may never fully disappear, which means the world was already living with the oil price that didn't fully account for the fragility of this system, and it may never go back. The next time you pull up to a pump and feel the sting of what costs to fill your tank, you're not just paying for gasoline. You're paying for the insurance premium on a tanker captain willing to sail through a war zone. You're paying for the geopolitical risk premium that markets are now pricing into every barrel. And you're also paying for the decades of a global economy built around the assumption that 20 miles straight in the Persian Gulf would always be open. One war, one closure, one choke point. And the price of everything moved. That's how power works. And that's how motion travels through a system built on oil. That's motion and power. If this gave you a clearer picture of what actually happening behind the headlines, subscribe. We go deeper on stories like this every week.